"Back off, old man, or you're next." That's what one of them said right before they tased my wife. They turned their weapons on me next. I didn't shout or run. I just looked at their commander and calmly said 5 words. "Call General Rohr right now." That's when the SWAT team froze. Sometimes 5 words are enough to stop even the most hardened professionals. Roy Tanner was known on Oakwood Drive as the guy who could fix anything with an engine. Most weekends his garage was open, the air filled with the sound of tools and the classic rock. At 68, his hands weren't as steady, but they still knew every bolt, gear and belt. Few knew about his past. 27 years in military service, covert missions in places no one would ever hear about, medals stored in a shoebox never displayed. Roy liked it that way. He wanted to be remembered for fixing carburetors, not for secret ops that history books forgot. Only Linda knew everything. She stood by him through the nightmares, the invisible wounds, and the long transition back to civilian life. Their 43-year marriage endured deployments, silence, and healing. Their modest ranch home had become a haven. Roy volunteered at the VFW, built ramps for disabled veterans, and taught Autoshop to kids other teachers had given up on. That Wednesday seemed ordinary. Roy was under Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick changing her oil. Linda had gone to Palmer's Market for the senior discount. The air hinted at fall. Then came the sound of screeching tires. Too fast, too deliberate. Roy slid out from under the car as the first black SUV blocked his driveway. Then 3 more. Then shouting, "Police!" Everyone on the ground. Men in tactical gear spilled out, weapons raised. Roy stood slowly, hands visible, grease on his fingers. "There's some mistake," he started to say, but a rifle shot him up. "Down. Now." He obeyed, face pressed to concrete, boots all around him. Radios crackled. "Secure the house," one voice said. Another zip-tied Roy's wrists. That's when Linda came home. She stepped out of the car, arms full of groceries. "Roy, what's going on?" she asked, alarmed. 3 officers turned. On her, guns raised. "Drop the bags. Hands up." She froze, bags clutched to her chest. "Please, She's not complying," one officer barked, voice cracking with tension. "Final warning." She tried to lower the bags, but arthritis made her slow. "Non-compliant subject," the officer declared, stepping forward with his taser drawn. "She's my wife." "She's just bringing groceries," Roy shouted. A boot dug into his back. "Step. Back, old man, or you're next." Then came the crack of the taser. Linda's body jerked violently. The bags burst. Eggs shattered, apples rolled, milk splattered across the driveway. She crumpled to the ground. Roy didn't panic. Decades of training held. He stayed focused, locked eyes with the commander. "Let me up," he said calmly. The officer hesitated, then nodded. Roy stood, wrists still bound, and stared directly into the commander's face. He said 5 words. "Call General Rohr right now." The commander blinked, visibly thrown off. The team stayed tense, weapons raised, radios buzzing. One young officer sneered. "What, you think name-dropping the military scares us? We're here for Carlos Mendez, major drug trafficking case." Roy didn't flinch. His eyes never left the commander. "This is 4588 Oakwood Drive. You're looking for 4588 Oakwood Avenue, different zip code entirely." Roy's voice stayed calm, even though Linda was still lying motionless on the pavement. "Now cut these restraints and call General James Rurik at Central Command. I need to check on my wife. She has a heart condition." The SWAT commander paused, doubt flickering across his composed exterior. "Check the address," he ordered one of his men. While they scrambled to verify, Roy spoke again. "Left inside pocket of my jacket. Look, don't touch." With caution, the commander reached into Roy's jacket, gloved hands pulling out a worn metal badge engraved with a black eagle, immediately recognizable to anyone with a military intelligence background. "Black protocol clearance," Roy said softly. The street fell silent. Even the radios seemed to hush. One older tactical officer leaned toward the commander and whispered, "Sir, that's not just military. That's Tier 1. That's RU." Everything changed. The commander straightened. "Get the medic over here, now. Cut his restraints." Roy dropped to his knees beside Linda, checking her pulse with steady, experienced hands. Around them, the raid began to unravel. One officer was frantically scrolling through databases, trying to confirm Roy's identity. Another radioed in the address discrepancy. "You hit the wrong house," Roy said coldly, lifting Linda into a sitting position. "You didn't verify. You escalated without justification. And you used excessive force on a senior citizen carrying groceries. A neighbor had filmed everything. Later, he'd tell reporters, He just said 5 words and the whole SWAT team backed down, like someone flipped a switch. The commander, now helmetless, approached sheepishly, face pale. Sir, we had intel that you had adrenaline and unchecked authority, Roy cut in, his voice low and sharp enough to make the man take a step back. Linda stirred. Roy, I'm here, he said gently, helping her. Then back to the commander. I'm taking my wife inside. Your team stays outside. And you will call General Raw. Now. The young officer who'd pulled the trigger on the taser stood, frozen, crushed under the weight of what he'd done. As Roy guided Linda toward the house, another officer quietly gathered the scattered groceries, a silent apology. The whispers among the SWAT team told Roy everything. Their search confirmed his identity. His name had popped up on lists they weren't even supposed to know existed. They thought they were raiding a drug house. Instead, they tased the wife of a man who didn't officially exist. If they'd led with respect instead of assumptions, no one would have been hurt. Comment, honor, if you believe real heroes don't need to raise their voices. 40 minutes later, inside the Tanner home, Linda lay on the couch, an ice pack on her chest. Roy sat beside her, always touching her hand, eyes checking the driveway behind the parted curtains. The SWAT team remained outside, quiet now, their confidence drained. 2 officers had gone to the actual address, only to find the suspect had moved months ago. The command vehicle's radio now buzzed not with orders, but with apologies and damage control. When a black SUV with military plates pulled up, it did so silently, no sirens, just intent. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out. No uniform, no insignia, but presence. General James Rohr. At 62, with silver hair and an unspoken authority in his posture, he surveyed the scene briefly, ignoring the scrambling SWAT commander. Roy met him at the door. The 2 men locked eyes in silence, a language only shared by those who'd seen the same wars. Then formally, Rohr raised his hand in salute. Roy returned it, his first in 15 years. They told me you were dead, the general said. Only professionally, Roy replied. Rohr's eyes moved to Linda on the couch, his jaw clenched. Then he turned to face the SWAT team. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This man, he said, gesturing toward Roy, wrote the protocols you just violated. The officers stood frozen. One of them, the older team member, suddenly whispered in awe, Tanner, R.J. Tanner, you wrote the Civilian Engagement Handbook, the one from advanced training. Roy gave a single nod. Not proud, just confirming. The truth. Rohr stepped toward the commander. You didn't detain a suspect today, he said coldly. You humiliated a national asset, a man whose operational experience likely outweighs your entire team's combined. The commander began to speak, but Rohr interrupted him. The officer who used the taser without proper threat assessment. Where is he? A young officer stepped forward, visibly shaking. Hand over your gear, Rohr said. Without protest, the officer removed his tactical vest, sidearm and badge, placing them on a nearby vehicle. You're relieved. Report to your captain for reassignment. No one said a word as the officer walked away and sat quietly in a patrol car, his head down, realizing his career was over. Turning back to Roy, Rohr reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. This has 2 things, he said quietly. A formal apology from the department and your clearance reinstated. We need you back, Roy. The world hasn't gotten any safer. Roy stared at the envelope but didn't take it. The world never changes, James, he said. Only the uniforms and the weapons do. He looked toward Linda, watching silently from the doorway. My duty is to her now, and to fixing cars, not solving problems with tactics. Rohr nodded, understanding. He placed the envelope on the porch railing. The offer still stands, he said, and walked away. Roy never opened the envelope. Some answers didn't need thinking through. A week later, Police Chief Michael Brennan held a press conference. Standing before American flags, he introduced the 5 words protocol, a new mandatory training focused on de-escalation, proper ID checks, and treating civilians with respect. He never mentioned Roy or Linda by name. He didn't need to. The video had gone viral, even after attempts to suppress it, and the community knew what had brought about the change. Linda recovered slowly. The taser hadn't worsened her heart condition, but deep bruises had formed where the barbs hit. She never spoke of the pain, not the physical kind, nor the deeper wound of being treated like a threat in her own driveway. But something changed in her posture. She walked taller with Roy at the grocery store. She met officers' eyes when they passed. She refused to be diminished by what had happened. Roy carried on. He changed the oil in Mrs. Henderson's Buick, showed up at the VFW on Thursdays, and still taught auto shop students that second chances often came hidden beneath engine grease and patience. But the neighborhood noticed what had shifted, how patrol cars slowed near his home, how officers greeted him first, how an unmarked SUV sometimes dropped off small packages on his porch, books, good whiskey, and once a restored photo of a younger Roy surrounded by blurred faces. 3 months later, a rookie officer's cruiser broke down near Roy's house. Roy came out with tools before the officer had even called it in. As they worked together, the young man finally asked the question everyone at the academy wondered. "Sir," he said, hesitant, "you could have ended careers that day. Why didn't you?" Roy tightened a bolt. "Because revenge doesn't fix engines," he said. "And it doesn't fix people either." The cruiser started right up. "Thank you, sir," the young officer said, full of respect. "Roy," he corrected. "Just Roy." Later that week, a reporter caught him outside the VFW. "Mr. Tanner," she said, microphone out, "why didn't you fight back when your wife was attacked? You had the training. You had the right. Why just 5 words?" Roy looked into the camera, calm, not proud. "Because 5 words were louder than fear," he said. "And sometimes the strongest stance isn't standing over someone. It's standing your ground." Then he walked away. Back to his truck, back to the life he chose after a career that would never be in history books or ceremonies. Just a man who fixed things. A man who knew that true power doesn't need to shout. A man who learned that mercy speaks louder than force. Someone who had once been a weapon and had chosen to become a builder instead.